In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. You really couldn't ask for better timing. What a great response to the gospel. So I have a question to start off with this morning. Has anyone heard of an Elijah chair? Okay, good. It makes me feel better that it's not just me. Growing up, my family did. Amongst all the many little fun peculiarities and traditions that my family had, or idiosyncrasies, however you want to think of it, one of the things that happened time and time again was that there'd be an extra place setting at the dinner table. I'm not sure how it happened, but somehow someone always set an extra place. And my mom or my dad or one of my siblings, someone almost every time remarked, "Oh, that's the chair for Elijah." And I'm not really sure why. I'm not sure it was just, they really liked the story of Elijah and his little dynamic with Elisha. But that's what comes to mind anytime I hear any mention of Elijah, is having an extra place at the dinner table in case Elijah shows up, I guess. I'm not really sure, but there it is. The reading from 2 Kings describes this great prophet, Elijah, being taken up to heaven. He's one of two people in the Bible that are named that did not die. Does anyone know who's the other person? So Elijah. Anyone? No? It's Enoch. You all know that. You know Enoch. They're the two that did not die, that are taken up. Anyway, so over to Elijah is described as having the Spirit of the Lord with him, very present with him and in his life. And what we see through 2 Kings here is that he knows that it's time to pass the mantle on to Elisha. We just heard the sequence where Elijah tells Elisha a couple times that he's trying to say, "Hey, it's time for me to go." And they go through Bethel and then Jericho and then the Jordan River. And Elisha, it's going to get confusing, but Elisha knows that his master is about to leave. And before the chariots of fire swoop in and take Elijah up, Elijah strikes the water and divides it and parts it, just like Moses. And this allows them to walk on dry land and get to the other side. And then Elijah is taken up, and Elisha takes up the cloak that fell off him and does the same thing. This, marks itself as sort of a recognition that the Lord, the Spirit, has passed down to Elisha. Now he has the Spirit with him, showing that the Spirit is still present with God's people. And I like the connection here between them just walking across dry land through water, and then the connection to Jesus walking across wet land, also known as a sea. Jesus crosses over water to be present with his disciples. This whole sequence is really beautiful. In some ways, it's very similar to the rest of his miracles throughout his ministry, but in other ways, it's completely different and unique. He's not healing a crippled man or feeding a huge crowd, but he's walking on water. That's the miracle. Him walking on water. The gospel describes this happening late into the night during what's called the fourth watch, about 3 hours before dawn. This is the same day that we heard last week where Jesus fed the great crowd with just 5 loaves and 2 fish. He sends his disciples on the boat and he waves goodbye to the crowd and he goes off to pray. That's what we hear. He goes off on his own to pray by himself. He leaves the group. This is important to remember as we're reading what the disciples are experiencing as the winds are raging. They have no idea where their master has gone. They have no idea if he's coming back to save them. And so this heightens their concern and their unknown safety. So something distinct is being presented. Most of the miracles that we read through the Gospels are really beneficial to either a person or a group of people. Like the feeding of the 5,000, he provides food and sustenance for people. At the wedding of Cana, he provided for a great party. Most of the miracles fulfill an immediate need, either a healing of a chronic illness or cleansing or providing some sort of sustenance. But walking on water, to me, it seems kind of self-indulgent a little bit. Like almost as if he's just showing off what great things he can do. You know, look what I can do that you can do. Come on. This makes me ask the question then, what is the point of both this miracle but all miracles in general? With this basic definition of a miracle being something that man or nature cannot do. But what's the point? A few years ago, a friend of mine asked me while I was in seminary about what's the deal with miracles. Why do we have so many records of these miracles happening, and why do we know them? Why should we care about them? And I thought, well, isn't it obvious? Like, it's a miracle, you know? They're great. It shows, you know, God's power and authority. They're a gift, but as I was trying to explain, I wasn't satisfied with my answer either. I think there was something more to why we have all of these miracles. The reality is that sometimes they are simply showing that Christ has the power to heal, to provide a miraculous recovery from an illness, providing a great amount of food, and again, the feeding of the 5,000 is on the mind. But Jesus gives a better answer in John's Gospel. Chapter 14 says this: "Believe me that I am in the Father and the Father in me, or else believe me for the sake of the works themselves." You can just believe and accept that Jesus is the Lord, but you can also believe in the things that Jesus really did do. Miracles provide an incentive for faith. They're an incentive to our faith. Miracles inspire and amaze. They tell us something. They serve as a grounding for our belief. Miracles tilt us sort of in the direction of faith, inclining our hearts and our minds and our whole self towards faith in Jesus as the Son of God. It's worth reminding ourselves of a recent time that the disciples were gathered in a boat. Things were a little bit dicey then too. Back in Mark chapter 4, there was a great storm, and this was described as being on the verge of tearing the boat apart. Like things were actually quite dire. And Jesus was taking a little nap. And the disciples are scared, and they wake him, and they are looking for help. And then he calms the storm. And there he was with them the whole time. In today's reading, he's nowhere in sight at first. They'd been on the sea since the evening. Again, feeding the 5,000 happened during the day. Jesus says, "Go to the other side, disciples. Go away, crowd," and he goes off to pray. So the disciples are in the boat all through the night. All through the night, toiling against the great winds that prevent them from getting to the other side. Jesus comes to them only after a whole night of toil and struggle has already happened. And it's not for lack of trying or effort. It says that they were rowing, they were trying, but progress was just incredibly slow or a little bit treacherous at worst. But when Jesus finally comes to the boat, we hear that they're afraid. They see him and they're afraid that he's a ghost. And the disciples are troubled. And Jesus calms them by saying something very simple. He says, take heart, or cheer up. It has this connotation of boldness and courage, of really take heart, for it is I. Jesus uses God's name for himself, recalling when Moses meets God at the burning bush. Jesus makes God visible to the disciples and to us. It's the very presence of Jesus that makes God visible and tangible and present to us. It's that very presence which calms the disciples and calms the storm. The Venerable Bede, a 7th century monk, described this passage very succinctly. He describes the toil of the disciples in rowing and the contrary wind mark out the labors of the church, who amidst the beating waves of the world and the blasts of unclean spirits strives to reach the repose of her celestial country. There's a lot in that, but I want to see how he describes the labors of the disciples in the boat are analogous to our own labors as Christians here and now. The physical endeavors and the task while being swept back and forth by the world, with our sights all the while on the resting place of that celestial country, being welcomed into the Father's open arms. Jesus recognizes our attempts, just like he recognizes the disciples' attempts. If you see closely in this interaction, the text says that he intended to pass by. He did not sort of impose himself. He didn't come sweeping in immediately to their rescue without them asking and acknowledging his presence. But they saw him. They saw him and cried out to him, and they recognized him, and they reached out. That's the point. And Jesus makes himself available to us all of the time. But it's on us to ask. This lesson gives us hope that Christ really is there, even in the very middle of the sea. He's not close to the edge. They're not close to the bank. They're literally in the middle of the sea with a great amount of water separating them from land. It really is a wonderful miracle that even when the disciples have no idea how Jesus can do any of these things, their hearts being hardened, that's how this passage ends, which describes how they can't recognize who he is. That even as he performs all of these miracles, they don't understand because they don't see him truly as the Son of God. Their hearts being hardened, the storm is made still. Even when they thought him to be a ghost, he still came to them. Even when no one understood how he could walk on water, multiply bread and fish, heal the blind, the lame, and chronically ill, Jesus performs these miracles. And Jesus walks with them and with us. To quote the old St. Bede one more time, he sums it up perfectly to describe our hope in what Christ has for us. In the fourth watch, he came to them as daylight approached. For when man lifts up his mind to the light of guidance from on high, the Lord will be with him, and the dangers of temptations will be laid asleep. And so our dangers and fears will also be laid asleep with the presence of Jesus Christ in our lives.